Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're doing a deep dive,
Huh.
and it's a tough one. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. We've got a lot of legal documents to sift through and quite a bit of historical research.
And that's what makes the Justice Department's 2025 review so fascinating. It goes beyond just recounting the events.
Right. It analyzes what could have happened, legally speaking, what charges could have been brought, if the laws were different back then.
Adds a whole new layer to the tragedy.
Absolutely. So, okay, let's set the scene. 1921, Tulsa, Oklahoma. A booming oil town, right? On the surface, at least. But underneath all that prosperity.
There's a very deep racial divide.
Yeah, deeply ingrained.
And right in the middle of all that was Greenwood, a thriving black community, known as Black Wall Street.
Right. And from the research, it's clear Greenwood wasn't just, accidentally successful. It was a deliberate effort.
Absolutely, to create black economic self-sufficiency. In the face of segregation, a direct challenge to the racist power structures of the time.
Okay, so that context, that racial tension, it's key to understanding everything that unfolded. Vigilante groups were on the rise. You had this whole atmosphere of white supremacy. It was already a powder keg.
And you can't forget the impact of World War I. Both black and white veterans came back changed.
Right. Black veterans having fought for democracy overseas, they weren't going to just accept being treated as second-class citizens back home.
And some white veterans, well, they harbored resentment. And their combat training, sadly, came into play during the massacre.
Then you have this incident, seemingly minor at first, a young black shoe shiner, Dick Rowland, and a white elevator operator, Sarah Page. The details are still unclear, even now.
We may never know exactly what happened in that elevator. Maybe Roland tripped, maybe there was an accidental bump. But the accusation alone was enough.
Fueled by that inflammatory article in the Tulsa Tribune.
Right, an article filled with inaccuracies and inflammatory language that painted Roland as a predator and Page as a helpless victim. It played on all the existing racial fears and anxieties.
It's interesting, there are actually missing sections from the Tulsa Tribune from that time.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. No one's ever found a copy. But some survivors claim there was an editorial urging Roland's lynching.
Wow. So they basically tried to erase the evidence of incitement.
Seems that way. So tensions were already high, and this incident just became the catalyst. White mobs gathered at the courthouse, demanding Roland be lynched. It's important to note, the sheriff actually tried to protect Roland. He barricaded him inside the courthouse.
Shows a lot of courage, especially considering the context.
Definitely. His actions were in stark contrast to the inaction, maybe even complicity, of other law enforcement officials. Some accounts even suggest officers were involved in spreading rumors, making things worse.
Fueling the mob's anger.
Exactly. And then you have a group of armed black veterans, many World War I vets, who arrive at the courthouse. Their goal was to help protect Roland, to prevent a lynching.
They weren't there to start a riot. They were trying to stop an injustice, again.
Right. But their presence, unfortunately, it inflamed the mob even more. It was seen as a challenge to white authority.
They wouldn't just accept the racial hierarchy that defined Tulsa at the time.
By the night of May 31st, the situation just boiled over. Violence erupted. And while accounts differ on who fired the first shot, the truth is the underlying tension and prejudice had created a powder keg. It was bound to explode.
A single spark was all it took, and the Justice Department's report acknowledges this. The exact trigger might be unclear, but the underlying conditions, the racial animosity, the economic disparity, the emboldenment of white supremacist groups, well, they set the stage.
Right, it was a perfect storm. So it starts as these chaotic gun battles in the streets,
Yeah.
but it quickly escalates. It turns into a horrifyingly organized invasion of Greenwood.
That shift from a spontaneous riot to a planned attack, that's crucial to understanding the massacre. By June 1st, it's no longer just a mob. It's a force of white Tulsans, many with military experience, systematically descending on Greenwood.
And the level of organization is just chilling. They were literally companies of men, aided by the Tulsa Police Department and even the National Guard, methodically destroying homes and businesses.
You know, the sources you provided, they suggest premeditation. There are witness accounts describing police recruiting men for a raid on Greenwood, handing out deputization badges. Weapons were readily available.
This wasn't just like a sudden burst of violence. This was a calculated assault on a thriving black community.
What stands out to you from the survivor accounts? I mean,
It's hard to even imagine the terror those families experienced. One of the most harrowing accounts involves the murder of Dr. A.C. Jackson, who was a prominent black surgeon. Imagine surrendering to armed men only to be shot in cold blood. It just speaks volumes about the racism that fueled the attackers.
It breaks my heart to read the accounts of children witnessing their loved ones murdered, families trapped in their attics as their homes burned. It's unimaginable, the terror and the loss.
And it's even more disturbing when you contrast that violence against black residents with how white looters were treated.
Right. Leniency, encouragement even, from law enforcement.
It suggests that some officers not only looked the other way, but they actively participated.
The looting, the destruction. Yeah, it points to the systemic nature of the violence. It wasn't just a mob acting on its own. There was complicity from those sworn to uphold the law.
And the aftermath was equally devastating. Thousands of black residents were rounded up, interned in camps, often in deplorable conditions.
Stripped of their possessions, forced into labor, humiliated, degraded.
And it's a critical point because it underscores the systemic racism that was at play. The internment camps weren't just about containing the aftermath.
They were a tool of control, oppression, the identification card system, the forced labor, it's clear.
You're right. It wasn't just about destroying buildings. It was about dismantling black economic power, a tactic used throughout history. And what's even more disturbing is that no white residents, even those accused of looting, were held in these camps.
It was a double standard, plain and simple. The internment camps were another way to disenfranchise black Tulsans, reinforce the racial hierarchy that the massacre itself aimed to uphold.
It's just, it's infuriating. And then, adding insult to injury, the initial promises of rebuilding and reparations made by Tulsa's leaders, they vanished.
Gone. Poof. They rejected outside aid, said they could handle it themselves, and then minimal support for Greenwood.
Instead, they implemented a fire ordinance,
Made rebuilding cost prohibitive for most black residents.
trying to displace them from the area. It's a tragic pattern, marginalizing communities devastated by disasters, denying them the resources to rebuild, and then compounding their losses with bureaucratic roadblocks.
And we can't forget the deliberate attempt to erase the memory of the massacre. For decades, it wasn't mentioned in textbooks, not taught in schools. The Tulsa Race Massacre was swept under the rug, a painful truth many tried to forget.
And that's why the work of historians, activists, and survivors is so important. They've fought to bring the story of Greenwood to light.
And the Justice Department's review is a huge step, not only acknowledging the horrors, but analyzing the events through a legal lens.
That's actually where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll explore the Justice Department's legal analysis.
Yeah.
Look at the potential charges that could have been brought.
And the fact that the statute of limitations has now expired.
Yeah.
Which raises some big questions about accountability and justice.
Okay.
A century after the event.
So we've been unpacking these horrific events, the Tulsa Race Massacre.
Yeah.
And now we're going to sort of shift gears a bit and look at the Justice Department's legal analysis.
It really is groundbreaking.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it confirms, well, something pretty disheartening. The statute of limitations has expired.
So that means
I think
any chance of prosecuting those involved is
gone.
gone.
It's tough, you know.
It is.
Knowing that justice in a legal sense will never be served.
Yeah. It's a hard pill to swallow.
It is.
You know, that those who perpetrated these crimes, those who turned a blind eye,
the official...
they're beyond the reach of the law now.
Yeah, they are.
It's tough.
It is. But I think there's something to be said for the report itself being a form of justice. A century too late, for sure, but it does bring the truth into the light.
It does.
Officially recognizes the horrors that were inflicted upon Greenwood and its residents.
For sure. It challenges those narratives
Yes.
that have been, perpetuated for so long
Right.
that downplayed or even outright denied the massacre.
For decades, the story of Greenwood was silenced, erased from history books, public memory. This report pushes back against that erasure,
Yeah.
ensures that the truth is preserved
It does.
for future generations.
But truth and acknowledgement,
Right.
they're essential, but they're not enough.
No.
The legacy of the Tulsa Race Massacre, it extends far beyond those 2 horrific days in 1921.
It's true. It's woven into the fabric of Tulsa,
Yeah.
America, with consequences that we're still dealing with today.
Yep.
The massacre didn't just destroy homes and businesses, it destroyed generational wealth,
Yeah.
shattered community trust, and left deep scars of trauma, scars that are still felt today.
You touched on the economic impact.
Yes.
Greenwood, before the massacre,
Yeah.
was a thriving economic center.
A testament to Black entrepreneurship
Yeah,
and self-sufficiency.
absolutely.
It was a place where Black professionals flourished, businesses thrived, Families built a better future, and the massacre just wiped all of that away,
Yeah.
leaving behind economic devastation that still impacts Black Tulsans today.
It's just, it highlights how racial violence is a tool of economic disenfranchisement.
Absolutely. The destruction of Greenwood wasn't just about hate, it was about power. It was about control.
Yeah.
By destroying Greenwood, white Tulsans not only decimated a vibrant community, but also stunted Black economic progress for
Right.
generations to come.
And beyond the financial, there's the psychological toll
Right.
of witnessing such violence, losing everything you've worked for,
Your home.
forced from your home, your community.
The trauma inflicted upon Greenwood's residents is just immeasurable.
Yeah.
Survivors live with the nightmares,
The fear.
or the grief for the rest of their lives. And that trauma has been passed down
Through generations.
through generations, shaping the lives of their children.
Their grandchildren.
Grandchildren, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the wounds of the past don't just heal with time.
Yeah.
They linger for generations,
They do.
impacting mental health, community well-being, even life expectancy.
This is a powerful example
It really is.
of how historical trauma can manifest in the present.
Absolutely.
The distrust of law enforcement, the fear of racial violence, that sense of vulnerability.
They're all echoes of that event.
Yeah. And then there's the complex issue of reparations,
Oh, yeah.
which has been a long and contentious battle.
For decades, survivors and descendants of the massacre have fought for compensation for their losses. They've demanded recognition of the injustice, pushed for meaningful steps to address the ongoing disparities.
That stemmed from that event.
That stemmed from the massacre.
Yeah.
But these efforts have been met with resistance.
Yeah.
City officials, insurance companies, even the state of Oklahoma
Wow.
have fought tooth and nail against any attempt to provide reparations.
Legal challenges have been dismissed, legislative efforts stalled.
It's a textbook example of how systemic racism continues to operate,
Yes.
even when there's overwhelming evidence of injustice.
The fight for reparations, it's about more than just money.
So much more.
It's about accountability.
Yes.
Acknowledging the wrongs of the past.
Right.
And taking concrete steps
To repair the damage.
to repair the damage that was done.
It's about justice.
It is.
And this fight is far from over. The call for reparations for the Tulsa Race Massacre is growing louder. It's fueled by a renewed focus on racial justice.
And a growing awareness of the lasting impact of historical trauma.
Yes, exactly.
And the Justice Department's report, while it can't bring about criminal charges, it adds fuel to this fire.
It does. It provides further evidence
Yeah.
of the systemic racism that led to the massacre
Right.
and the decades of denial.
That followed.
It strengthens the moral argument for reparations,
Absolutely.
and it highlights the need for action
Right.
to address the wrongs of the past.
It forces us to confront that uncomfortable truth
Yes.
that America's history is stained with the blood of racial violence.
And the legacy of that violence continues to shape us.
Yes.
A legacy we cannot ignore.
It demands our attention
A reflection.
and our action.
Mm-hmm.
So we've explored the horrific events of the Tulsa Race Massacre. We've delved into the Justice Department's findings. And,
It's a lot to take in.
yeah, where do we even go from here?
It's the question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, acknowledging what happened, that's crucial, but
It's just the first step.
it is, yeah. We
No.
need to move beyond just recognizing the horror and actually start taking action
Right.
to address those systemic issues that allowed it to happen in the first place.
What would meaningful action even look like? What are some concrete steps that we could take?
Well, I think it involves a multi-pronged approach, addressing both the specific needs of Tulsa's Black community
Okay.
and the broader issue of racial injustice across America.
For sure.
For Tulsa, the issue of reparations.
It remains front and center.
It does, absolutely. I mean, direct financial compensation to survivors and descendants. That's
Yeah.
essential. But reparations shouldn't stop there. It needs to include investments in education, healthcare, economic development.
Right. In Tulsa's historically Black communities.
Exactly.
So it's about leveling the playing field in a way.
It is.
Addressing those generational disadvantages that stem from the deliberate destruction of Greenwood.
Greenwood's economic and social infrastructure. It is.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing the intergenerational trauma that's been inflicted upon Black Tulsans.
Yeah.
Providing access to mental health resources, support services.
That's critical.
It is. And I think the Tulsa Race Massacre should also serve as a catalyst for a broader national conversation about Race.
Inequality.
Inequality, the legacy of racial violence in America. Do you think that's happening?
It's starting to, but we have a long way to go, right?
We do.
It's an opportunity to really examine how systemic racism is still present
Yeah.
in our institutions, our policies, our everyday interactions.
It's about acknowledging that the fight for racial justice isn't over, and understanding how the past shapes the present.
Is essential to that fight.
It is.
Taking action is key. Supporting policies that promote equity and inclusion.
Challenging racist attitudes and behaviors.
Amplifying the voices of those who have been marginalized. Those are all crucial steps.
Education is also key.
It is.
Ensuring that the Tulsa Race Massacre is taught accurately and comprehensively
in schools.
In schools.
Across the country, yeah.
Yeah, could help prevent similar atrocities from happening in the future.
It's true. We can't learn from history if we don't know it.
Right.
And we can't break this cycle of racial violence if we don't understand its roots, its lasting impact.
This deep dive has been incredibly informative, and the research that you've shared has also been deeply unsettling.
It's hard to hear.
Yeah, it's hard to grasp the scale of the tragedy.
The calculated cruelty.
Yeah.
The persistent denial of justice. It's a lot.
It is. It is. And it's a sobering reminder that the fight for justice continues.
It does.
And it's a fight we all have a role to play in.
Absolutely.
Dismantling systems of oppression.
Building a more equitable future.
Requires a collective effort. As we wrap up our exploration of the Tulsa Race Massacre, I keep coming back to this question. What will you do with this knowledge?
It's a good question. It's a question we all need to be asking ourselves, right? Will this knowledge, will it fuel your passion for justice? Will you use it to educate others, to challenge injustice, to make a difference in your own community? The choice is yours. But one thing is for certain. The story of Greenwood
Must be told.
It must be told. Its lessons learned and its victims never forgotten.
The Tulsa Race Massacre may be a century old, but its relevance is undeniable. And it's a stark reminder of what can happen when prejudice and hate are allowed to fester. It's a call to action for all of us to work towards a more just and equitable world.
A better world.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring this crucial part of American history. Reflect on what you've learned and consider how you can contribute to the ongoing fight for racial justice.